Hello again.
Hi.
If there was a single text that meant more to me than all others when I was analyzing to stay or to leave the Watchtower back in 1986-87, this was the text. There were many dozens of texts really that play a part in this, and we've already dealt with many of them in the Paradise Lost series and also in the Hope series, but this is the one, I think, that made the most difference at the time for me, and at some point I passed it on to Vivian, and it did make a difference to her too in her leaving later. Before we get to that Vivian's part of the story though, I thought we should read the text itself, and you perhaps would begin to understand why this was so important.
And the text is from Zechariah chapter 14. We're going to read verses 1 to 7 and verse 10, and this is from the Watchtower's Bible, the New World Translation. Look, there is a day coming belonging to Jehovah, and the spoil of you will certainly be apportioned out in the midst of you. And I shall certainly gather all the nations against Jerusalem for the war, and the city will be actually captured, and the houses be pillaged, and the women themselves will be raped. And half of the city must go forth into the exile. But as for the remaining ones of the people, they will not be cut off from the city. And Jehovah will certainly go forth and war against those nations as in the days of fight. And his feet will actually stand in that day upon the mountain of olive trees, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east, and the mountain of the olive trees must be split at its middle, from the sun rising and to the west. There will be a very great valley, and half of the mountain will actually be moved to the north, and half of it to the south. And you people will certainly flee to the valley of my mountains, because the valley of the mountains will reach all the way to Azel. And you will have to flee, just as you fled, because of the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, the king of Judah. And Jehovah my God will certainly come, all the holy ones belonging with him, or being with him. And it must occur in that day that there will prove to be no precious light. Things will be congealed, and it must become one day that is known as belonging to Jehovah. It will not be day, neither will it be night. And it must occur that at evening time it will become light. Then verse 10, the whole land will be changed like the Arabah, from Geba to Rimmon, to the south of Jerusalem, and she must rise and become inhabited in her place, from the gate of Benjamin all the way to the place of the first gate, all the way to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel all the way to the press vats of the king.
Well, perhaps if you've watched any of the Paradise Lost videos, some of which were on Zechariah and other latter prophets of the period before Christ, you may guess why some of the verses in here would cause a problem for me. Mm-hmm. But the Watchtower has attempted to explain this prophecy on several occasions, going back at least to the days of Joseph Rutherford. So in 1933, the Watchtower published a book called Preparation, in which Rutherford attempted to explain the text we just read. Some of the key texts he didn't apparently explain, because I couldn't find any direct reference to them. But here's how they explain some of the terms that are in this text, Zechariah 14, 1 to 7 and 10. The spoil of you will certainly be apportioned out. Quote from Preparation. In the year 1918, when the Elijah work was killed, Jerusalem, quote, the new and righteous government under Christ, the holy organization of Jehovah. The city, Jehovah's covenant people on earth. The houses to be pillaged. Quote, the society's headquarters and offices were rifled and searched without legal warrant, and books of account and important private papers were seized and carried away. Then followed the searching of many private houses and classrooms of God's people, and a wholesale seizure of their property. Many were arrested and thrown into prison because they had in possession Bibles and books bearing testimony to the name of Jehovah God and his kingdom. The women themselves will be raped. Quote, those chaste virgins espoused unto Christ, greatly humiliated by the agents of Satan, who under the pretext of making the world safe for democracy showed no respect to the virgin purity and the relationship of the faithful ones to Christ. The agents of the wicked one attempted to force these virgins to abandon their state of virtuous devotion to Christ. During the World War, there were those who became unfaithful to God and to Christ. Such were raped within the meaning of the scripture by Satan's agents, and their virginity was lost. Such unclean ones no longer could be called virgins, but would be called women. And we made the point in the Finnish Mystery series that we did a couple of weeks back that what have they done? If you could interpret this as a system or a method of interpretation, that you need to nail what that method of interpretation is, and basically it's making the entire text about
spiritualized. It's and about them.
About us.
Yeah, it's all pointing to their time in history. Anybody reading that book, Zechariah, would they figure that out? And certainly Zechariah wasn't written to them. When
was Zechariah written? Well, if you do your checking, even in the Watchtower literature, you find out Zechariah is written around 510 to 515 BC, much of it anyway. Mm-hmm. And Zechariah lived around that time, along with the prophet Haggai. So what would these terms mean to Zechariah 500 BC?
Yeah.
And terms like Jerusalem, houses, women, city, remnant, mountain of olive trees. Did Zechariah know anything about any of these things? Well, he lived near Jerusalem, if not in Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. He knew the Mount of Olives.
And if they do mean what the Watchtower is claiming they mean, then God was deceptive towards Zechariah and the prophets of that day and the people of that day.
Yeah.
Because when they heard Zechariah say these things, they would not have known that. It would be misleading them.
Yeah. So it's getting down to, do I trust the words that God gave us, mm-hmm. or do I trust men's interpretation?
Yeah. It's another Humpty Dumpty hermeneutics example.
All right. Let's press on with some of their applications back in the book preparation. And we'll do that in the next segment.